So I've been using the S24 Ultra now for over 2 months and I haven't looked back. Here's the thing though, I've made a bunch of videos on this phone, but after living with it and putting it through its paces, I have a lot more to say about Samsung's latest flagship. I think it's a no-brainer now that, quite simply, smartphones have become way too good. What I mean by this is that your S22 Ultra or Pixel 7 Pro or whatever top-end flagship from the last handful of years that you own doesn't really need to be replaced. And if you're looking at the S24 Ultra coming from last year's S23 Ultra, well, I would hold off. See, it's not that there's anything wrong with it. At least for me, this is a perfect phone. But aside from the upgrade over the already fast Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, a new anti-reflective coating, a couple of AI tweaks, what really makes this phone worth it? Because to me, and bear with me, this phone doesn't really feel like an improvement over the S23 Ultra. And I think that's the point that I really want to hammer home. Before we go any further though, a like and a sub to the channel is always appreciated. I just want to say thank you all so much for the support in the last couple of videos. You have absolutely killed it, and it really does mean a lot. Let me make something clear. This video isn't for you if you're coming from a 5-year-old phone. I think it goes without saying that the S24 Ultra is going to be an upgrade in every way imaginable. But if you're someone who's typically switching every year or every time a new flashy device comes around, let me help you save some money. I've been lucky enough to get hands-on with and experience some recent flagship phones, and in the Samsung realm, I've pretty much tried every device since the S22 Ultra. And while I do like the Ultra phones, in fact, I've been dailying the S24 Ultra, I just don't feel like this is a justifiable upgrade. And before you go straight to the comments and start breathing down my neck about how this is Samsung's best phone ever made, it's the best phone in the world, blah, 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 I'm not against you. I think that for 50% of the price, you can get 95% of the experience of the S24 Ultra with the S23 Ultra from last year. Let's just look at it like this. The S24 Ultra weighs 2 grams less at 232 grams, which isn't a noticeable change at all, and rather than armor aluminum, Samsung has decided to use titanium along the frame, which does give the phone a really nice matte finish around the edges. Gone on the S24 Ultra is the curved display, and while this does tend to be a very touchy subject for some, I honestly couldn't be happier with the decision. Aside from the screen protectors fitting so much better, I think that the display being flat makes the phone way easier to operate without any accidental touches and no weird color shift around the edges of the display. And when watching full screen content, the S24 Ultra seems much more substantial, giving you a seemingly bigger viewing area due to the waterfall effect being effectively gone. And as for the brightness of the display, while Samsung does boast a 2600 nit peak of the S24 Ultra, in real-world testing done by GSM Arena, it was revealed that the difference is much smaller at less than 200 nits between the S24 Ultra and S23 Ultra, giving the S24 Ultra a peak of 1447. So don't get it twisted here, the S24 Ultra's display is obviously slightly brighter, but it's not as big of a leap as you might expect when reading just typical reviews and spec sheets. Though where Samsung really does hammer it home on the S24 Ultra is that anti-glare display. It does really do wonders to cut reflections, but the downside to this is that while using a screen protector, like most people will, this effect disappears entirely. And given that the S24 Ultra's display is still much harder and works much better against scratches than the S23 Ultra, I really don't think I'd still trust myself without a screen protector using this phone as my daily driver. Like, the peace of mind is so much better having one of these things on the phone than not having it at all. And while I do really like the anti-glare coating and think that this is probably the best thing, most underrated upgrade that we've seen in a smartphone recently, I can't, man. I can't go without using a screen protector. Both the S23 Ultra and the S24 Ultra are also capable of the exact same 45-watt fast charging, so you're gonna get relatively the same or similar results when it comes to charging speeds. That being said, I have noticed the S24 Ultra to be really cool to the touch when charging, and I do remember times specifically, even in one of my videos that I made previously, talking about the fact that the S23 Ultra does get pretty warm while charging, but it's never been anything that's like concerning or something. And all that this really tells me at the end of the day is that the S24 Ultra is just a much more efficient phone. One thing that is important to note though is that between the S23 Ultra and the S24 Ultra devices is that the base model with 256 gigs of storage on the newest Samsung S24 Ultra is using 12 gigs of RAM, whereas the S23 Ultra still has a variant with only 8 gigabytes. Having more memory out of the gate is great for when it comes to keeping tons of apps stored in deep sleep, allowing you to resume them quickly without losing track of where you are. I personally have not had any experience with the 8 gigabyte model of the S23 Ultra, but what I will say is that if you're going to be paying the price anyway, just make sure that you get the 12 gig of RAM variant, because I've had no issues at all with 12 gigs of RAM on these devices. I have had absolutely no issues with app crashing, reloading, whatsoever. It's honestly been a really good experience. And now I think I'm gonna do this for the first time on the channel and actually bring up benchmarks for a second, because I really wanna hammer home a point. The S24 Ultra scores much higher with its 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy versus the 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy from last year, about 20 to 40% more. And while I do agree you're buying a productivity phone, the higher score is objectively better. The S23 Ultra was fast, it had great performance, it had no issues, and from my experience, this still holds very true. It's only been a year, and yes, while the performance jump is technically impressive in day-to-day use, I can't help but feel like it's just a non-issue, and that last year's S23 Ultra is going to handle everything you need to do without a problem. However, where I do see this kind of being an issue and poking its way up in a couple of years is if you plan on using this device long term, as honestly, the more performance you have, the better it will scale over the next couple of years. And with the S24 Ultra having 7 years of major OS updates and security patches, I would go as far as saying that the S24 Ultra could also last you significantly longer, both in terms of performance and in its upright usefulness. There is always going to be a new phone that comes out that is faster, sleeker, better. So if you're kind of just basing your purchasing decision on the upright performance of the S24 Ultra, you're gonna do the same thing next year, and there's no point. It's also just really hard to buy a phone based on its perceived longevity, because at the end of the day, we don't really know what we're headed toward. And a big example of that would be AI for starters. This stuff is an absolute must for me ever since having hands-on and daily driving the Pixel 8 Pro around its launch. Now, there are going to be AI features similar to what we have inside of the S24 Ultra coming into the S23 Ultra and so on, but I'm not entirely sure of whether they're going to be one-to-one in terms of feature parity. With the 8 Gen 3, it's seemingly an AI-centric chip with a good bit of prompts happening on device, and I'm not someone you'd want to ask about anything AI related, but I would not be surprised if some features that are on the S24 Ultra get completely skipped over rather than being implemented into the S23 Ultra because of this. Is it a big deal though? For me, yes, and that's not an exaggeration. There's definitely features on the S24 Ultra that have changed the way I use my device, especially some of the pixel focus features on Tensor with the Pixel 8 Pro. And it's heavily impacted how I look at smartphones from here on out. There's things like call screening, text calling, and circle to search. Those are all a game changer for me. And not having access to features like that would automatically make the phone feel like a step backwards. But I am also well aware of the fact that most people don't need it or care for it. I mean, circle to search is basically a baked-in Google reverse image search or photo lookup platform. But the convenience is nice. Though if you're someone who gets around with a basic tool like Siri, I don't think that you're someone who really needs any more. And I would definitely not go ahead and put AI at like the forefront of your purchasing expectations or something. I do want to talk about quite another controversial feature that was added to the S24 Ultra though, the 5x Periscope Lens. So the S23 Ultra has a 10x periscopic telephoto, and if all you're hearing is 10 being bigger than 5 and thinking, what a downgrade, I think this is where a lot of the anger comes from and where people have been getting confused. The 10x telephoto on the S23 Ultra is a 10 megapixel sensor with a much higher f-stop with worse low light performance, whereas the S24 Ultra's 5x telephoto is a much higher end 50 megapixel sensor. I know megapixels don't tell the whole story, but in this case, you're able to crop in 2 times on a 50 megapixel shot on the S24 Ultra's 5x telephoto lens to get a 10 times equivalent and still be left with a theoretically 25 megapixel image. What this means is that the S24 Ultra is much more versatile, and you're getting a 5x native lens for nice portraits with amazing separation in bokeh, as well as a digital crop to that 10x telephoto with amazing quality if you do actually need it. You also do get the benefit of 4K 120 FPS recording in the slow motion mode on the S24 Ultra, which is great for B-roll. And in my experience, using the S24 Ultra for video has been a massive leap over the S23 Ultra from only last year. Let's change it up for a quick second though, because in many ways I've just told you that the S24 Ultra is way better than the S23 Ultra. And ultimately, it is. But it is newer, came with a price bump, and is far more expensive and inaccessible for most people over the S23 Ultra. Personally, if I owned an S23 Ultra and wasn't making any content about smartphones, would I upgrade to the S24 Ultra? No, Does this mean that I don't think it's worth the price increase or the added features? No, but I don't believe you're getting too much more in terms of the value out of the device over something like the S23 Ultra, and I really don't think it's worth it if you already have last year's device in your pocket. I think it's very easy for us to get lost in what's new and exciting, and it throws every justification out the window. But the older I get, the more I understand the older people in my family saying, it's just the phone every time I upgrade. Do with your money as you wish. Obviously, I'm not here telling you how to spend it, but I wanted to give kind of like a different approach to this whole thing, because every time I watch a smartphone review, I don't really get people other than obvious haters telling you, hold off or don't buy it, especially the people that compare it between the older phones. I feel like every time you watch an S24 Ultra versus S23 Ultra video, you're leaving with the same conclusion. Yes, this phone is better, you should buy it. But that isn't really the case for a lot of people. A lot of people can't just afford to jump around and spend 1,750 Canadian dollars on this thing. And honestly, if you already have the S23 and S22 Ultra, you're not really losing too much in terms of the experience, especially if you use it as a phone like most people. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or found it anywhat insightful, I'd really appreciate a like and a comment down below. It means the world. Thank you all so much. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.